A widowed billionaire saw a nanny breastfeeding his baby, and what he did next would change both their lives forever. Inside his Chicago mansion, baby Samuel's cry drifted through the halls, weak and tired, as if the little boy was slowly losing strength. The hired nanny was gone, the staff kept quiet, and Jonathan Edwards sat locked in his office, unaware that his son's voice was fading into something dangerous. Downstairs, Grace Parker scrubbed the same spot on the floor, trying to ignore the sound, but her heart refused to stay calm. 6 weeks had passed since she lost her own newborn child, and every cry from upstairs felt like someone pulling open a wound she was trying to close. When Samuel's soft cry suddenly broke into a faint, painful sound, something inside Grace snapped. She ran up the stairs without thinking, her breath shaking, her hands trembling as she pushed open the nursery door. What she found inside forced her into a choice no one would understand, a choice born from instinct and grief. And when Jonathan finally walked in and saw what she had done to save his child, the truth that followed would break him, change her fate, and shake the entire house. Stay with us till the end, because this story will shake your heart and remind you that one moment can change everything. The night felt heavy inside the Edward mansion, the kind of quiet that made every small sound louder. Baby Samuel's faint cry drifted through the long hallway, a soft, shaking sound that did not match the size of the child making it. It was the kind of cry that did not beg for attention anymore, but begged for help. No footsteps approached his room, no door opened, no one came. The hired nanny who was supposed to watch him had left earlier in the afternoon, saying she needed to buy more formula, but she never returned. Hours passed, and the child's voice grew weaker as the rooms of the mansion swallowed his small sounds. Downstairs, Grace Parker slowly scrubbed the marble floor near the staircase. She had been wiping that same spot for a long time, yet the cloth never left her hand. Her mind was somewhere else, far from the shining tiles and rich walls around her. Every soft cry from upstairs made her fingers shake, yet she kept trying to distract herself with work, pretending she did not hear anything. She whispered, almost to herself, "Please, let him settle." But her voice did nothing to calm the storm inside her chest. 6 weeks had passed since she lost her own newborn child. 6 long weeks since she held a tiny warm body that belonged to her. Life had taken her baby too fast, leaving a hole inside her that did not close, no matter how hard she tried to breathe through the pain. Every time she heard Samuel cry, it reminded her of the night she begged God to save her own baby. Sometimes she felt the sound in her bones, as if the memory was tied to her skin. Grace bent over the bucket, her breath unsteady, her eyes blinking fast as she fought the wave of grief rising inside her. She dropped her cleaning cloth for a moment and held the edge of the counter to steady herself. The cry from upstairs came again, this time softer, weaker, almost like the baby no longer had the strength to be loud. That sound made her look toward the stairs. Her hands began to tremble. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, trying to calm herself, but the shaking only grew stronger. Something deep inside her voice whispered, "He needs help." And no matter how much she tried to ignore it, her feet began to move. In that same moment, Jonathan Edwards sat behind his office desk with his tie hanging loose. Papers, files, and glowing screens were scattered everywhere. His business meeting from Tokyo was still running on the laptop in front of him. His mind was focused on numbers and decisions, anything that could keep him from thinking about his wife who died giving birth to Samuel. He worked to forget. He worked to escape. He worked so he did not have to feel. When the baby's cry reached him through the walls, he paused for a second, but the voice of someone on the screen said, "Mr. Edward, we need your response." And he forced himself to keep talking. Upstairs, the nursery remained untouched and still. The bottle on the table had spoiled, the room smelled faintly sour, and sweat covered Samuel's tiny forehead. He moved his small hands weakly, his little mouth tried to find comfort but found nothing. He was too young to understand that the person he needed was not coming back. His breaths grew thin, his eyelids heavy. Grace reached the bottom step of the staircase, but hesitated for a moment. She pressed a hand against her stomach, struggling with the fear that always came when she heard a baby cry now. Her heart wanted to protect Samuel, but her memory whispered that she was still broken. She shut her eyes for a moment, then forced her legs to move again. One step, another step, then another. She climbed the stairs quickly, her breath shaking as she moved. By the time she reached the top, her palms were sweaty and cold. The hallway looked longer than usual, the lights above her flickering softly. She walked to the nursery with her hand on the door handle, her body tense. When she pushed the door open, her heart dropped. Samuel lay in the crib with his face red and sweaty, his tiny lips cracked from dryness, his little chest rising too fast as if he was fighting for air. The baby made a weak sound, so soft that it barely touched the air before fading. Grace felt her knees weaken. She rushed to the crib, whispering, "Oh my God, please be all right," as she lifted him gently. The moment she held him, she felt how hot his body was. His skin burned against her arms, and his small hands opened and closed slowly, as if he was tired of trying. His head fell weakly against her shoulder. The spoiled milk bottle rolled off the table, hitting the floor with a dull tap that made her flinch. Grace's voice broke as she held him close. "I am here, little one. I am here," she whispered. Her tears slid down her face, falling onto his blanket. She rocked him gently, trying to calm him, but she knew he needed more than rocking. He needed real comfort, real warmth, real care, and the gnawing truth hit her hard. She was the only one here, the only one to help him. Her mind raced, her heart pushing her to act. Every mother's instinct she thought she had lost came alive again. She looked down at his small, tired face and knew that if she delayed even a second, the baby would grow weaker. Grace sat down in the armchair and held Samuel close to her chest. She whispered to him as if he could understand. "You are not alone. I will not let you suffer." Her voice cracked. The decision she faced was not easy, not simple, not something anyone in this house would understand. But she could not stand by and watch a child fade away in her arms. The room felt still, the air heavy, her heart breaking and healing at the same time as she made a choice from a place of deep pain and deep love. She knew this moment would change everything. She just did not know how much. Down the hallway, the sound of footsteps began to move toward the nursery, slow and steady, as if someone had finally left the world of business and entered the world of truth. And Grace, holding Samuel close, felt the air thicken with the fear of what would happen next. The door to the nursery opened slowly, and Grace felt her entire body freeze. She held Samuel close, his weak breaths brushing against her skin, and her own heart felt like it had stopped moving. Jonathan Edwards stepped inside, his tall figure filling the doorway, his face tired from long hours of work, and his eyes confused as they landed on the scene in front of him. For a moment, he did not speak. He just stood still, staring at Grace sitting in the armchair with his son pressed against her chest. The room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made every second feel longer than the last. Grace's hands trembled as she held the baby tighter, afraid he would slip from her arms if she let fear win. Jonathan took a slow step into the room. His voice came out low, rough, almost broken, as he whispered, "What are you doing?" Grace felt her breath shake. She knew how it looked. She knew this was a line she never planned to cross. She knew people would never understand what she had done and why she had done it. Tears pooled in her eyes as she looked down at the baby, then back at the man standing in front of her. "Sir, please," she said softly, her voice barely strong enough to carry across the room. "I can explain." Jonathan's eyes moved from her face to Samuel's sleeping body, then to her hands holding him. He took another slow step forward, his expression mixed with confusion and something darker. For a moment, he looked like a man torn between anger and fear, between wanting to demand answers and wanting to understand. "Explain what?" he asked quietly. "Grace, tell me what is happening." Grace swallowed hard, her voice shook as she spoke. "He was alone for hours, sir. The nanny never returned. His bottle was spoiled, he was burning with fever. He could not breathe well. I thought he was slipping away in my arms. I could not leave him like that. I did what I could to save him." Jonathan blinked, the confusion in his eyes growing deeper. He looked at his son again, truly seeing for the first time how peaceful the baby looked in Grace's arms, how his tiny chest rose and fell calmly, how his face no longer showed pain. A strange quiet filled the room. Grace continued, her voice cracking. "He needed comfort, sir. Real comfort. I know how it looks, but I promise you, I only wanted to help. I did not want this child to suffer." Jonathan turned slightly, running a hand over his forehead. The pressure of the moment weighed heavily on him. He did not know how to respond. His heart pulled him one way, his pride another. The rules of the world he lived in whispered to him that this was wrong, yet the sight in front of him told a different story. "I should have been here," Jonathan murmured, almost to himself. "I should have checked on him. I should have known something was wrong." Grace lowered her head. "You were working, sir. You did not hear him the way I did." Jonathan moved closer, stopping only a few steps away. His eyes softened for just a second before he pulled back again, trying to hide the storm inside him. "Grace," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Put him back in the crib. We will call a doctor." Grace nodded slowly. Her heart felt heavy, but she obeyed. She stood up gently, supporting the baby with both hands, and walked toward the crib. Samuel stirred softly, but did not cry. Grace placed him down and brushed her fingers over his small hand. "Sleep well, baby," she whispered. Jonathan watched her carefully. When she turned back toward him, she looked frightened, as if she expected him to shout. But he did not. His silence was almost worse. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the crib, his jaw tense, his breath uneven. "You should leave the room," he said quietly. "Let me handle the rest." Grace felt her chest tighten. She nodded, holding back tears, and walked past him toward the door. Before she stepped out, she whispered, "I am sorry, sir. I truly only wanted to help." She waited for him to say something, anything, but he said nothing. His silence followed her down the hallway as she walked slowly back to the staff quarters, her feet heavy, her heart full of fear that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Downstairs, the house felt colder. The echo of her footsteps filled the empty space. Grace sat on the small bench near the kitchen, staring at her hands, remembering the heat of Samuel's body. She wondered if she should have waited longer before helping him. She wondered if Jonathan would forgive her. She wondered if her decision would cost her the little job she had left in the world. Minutes felt like hours. She kept her eyes on the floor as her mind replayed everything that happened in the nursery. Every breath Samuel took, every cry she heard, every moment she panicked. Every reason her heart told her she had no choice. Upstairs, Jonathan paced back and forth in the nursery. He looked at his son, then at the empty chair where Grace had been sitting. His thoughts twisted together, questions filling his head. He knew his son was safe because of her. He knew the nanny had failed him. He knew he had left too much responsibility in the hands of people who did not care. But he also knew the world would not be kind to the choice Grace made. He sat in the armchair, leaning forward, placing his hands over his face. The picture of his late wife on the wall seemed to stare at him. Her gentle smile reminded him of promises he had made, promises he could not keep. He whispered softly, "What am I supposed to do?" His voice echoed in the empty room. Downstairs, Grace wiped her tears, hoping he would understand before it was too late, praying that the night would not end with her being thrown out into the cold. She did not know that outside the mansion, the wind was getting stronger, the clouds gathering, as if the sky itself sensed that something painful was coming. And Jonathan, torn between fear, pride, and a truth he did not know how to accept, stood at the edge of a decision that would shape all their lives. Morning crept slowly over Chicago, painting the sky with a dull gray light that carried no warmth. Inside the Edward mansion, the halls were quiet, too quiet for a house that held a crying child through the night. Grace Parker sat at the edge of her small bed in the staff quarters, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands locked together tightly. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Samuel's weak face, heard his faint cry, and felt his tiny body trembling in her arms. She wanted to check on him, but fear held her down like heavy chains. She did not know if Jonathan planned to speak to her, or fire her, or simply pretend she no longer existed. Her stomach felt tight with worry. She knew one thing for sure. The line she crossed last night would not be forgiven easily in a house like this. Upstairs, Jonathan stood near the crib, staring down at his son. He had not slept either. He spent most of the night sitting in the nursery, watching Samuel breathe, watching his little chest rise and fall quietly. The doctor had already come at dawn. Jonathan had called her in a rush, unable to ignore the fear gripping his heart. The doctor, a calm woman with gentle eyes, moved carefully around the room. She checked the baby's temperature, his small hands, his breathing. When she finished, she looked at Jonathan with a serious expression. "He is weak," she said softly. "He needs care, but this is not just sickness, Mr. Edward. This is emotional strain. The baby is distressed." Jonathan frowned. "Distressed?" She nodded slowly. "Infants do not speak, but they feel deeply. Something frightened him or broke his sense of safety." Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He looked away from the doctor, remembering the moment he walked in and saw Grace holding Samuel. His mind tried to push the thought aside, but it kept returning. The doctor continued, "He needs someone he trusts, someone who made him feel safe. Without that connection, he might refuse to eat or rest properly." Jonathan rubbed his forehead. "What does he need right now?" The doctor hesitated. "He needs the same person who calmed him last night." Jonathan felt his heart stutter. He knew exactly who she meant. Grace. The same woman he did not know how to speak to. The same woman he had judged without listening. The same woman whose decision he still struggled to understand. After the doctor left, Jonathan sat in the armchair, staring at the window. The sky had grown darker, like rain was gathering. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, trying to steady his thoughts. He whispered softly, "How did everything get this far?" Downstairs, Grace paced the small room, her hands shaking again. She kept hearing footsteps passing in the hallway, each one making her heart jump. She feared hearing her name called in anger. She feared being sent away with nothing. She feared losing her job, her shelter, and the one place that gave her a bit of peace after losing her own child. When a soft knock touched her door, Grace froze. She wiped her tears quickly and tried to stand straight. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she said, "Come in." One of the older maids, Mrs. Linton, stepped inside. She looked at Grace with mixed worry and pity. "Jonathan wants to see you," she said gently. Grace felt her chest tighten sharply. Her hands grew cold. Is he angry? Mrs. Linton sighed. He did not say. He just asked for you. Grace nodded slowly. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk. Every step to the office felt heavy, like the house itself was watching her. When she reached the tall door, she stood still for a moment, gathering courage she did not feel. She knocked lightly. "Sir," she whispered. Jonathan's voice came from inside, calm but unreadable. "Come in." Grace opened the door slowly. Jonathan stood near the window with his back turned. He did not face her at first, which only made her more nervous. She stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. For a few seconds, the room was filled with nothing but silence. Then Jonathan finally turned. His eyes were tired, his face pale, and his expression mixed with too many emotions to understand. "Grace," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Grace lowered her head. "Yes, sir." Jonathan took a deep breath, as if he struggled to find the right words. "I spoke with the doctor this morning. She says, my son is emotionally shaken. She believes something scared him or made him feel unsafe." Grace swallowed hard. "I am sorry, sir." Jonathan stepped closer. "Tell me everything that happened last night. Tell me why you made that choice." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. Her voice trembled as she began to speak. "He was alone for so long, sir. His face was red, his body was hot, he could barely move. He cried and cried, but no one came. The nanny did not return. His milk was spoiled. I held him, but he kept getting weaker. I thought he would stop breathing." Jonathan felt a sting in his chest. "You should have called me." Grace lifted her eyes, tears already forming. "Sir, I thought of calling you, but Samuel was slipping. He needed help right then. He needed warmth, comfort, something that could calm his fear. My body could still give what he needed, and I could not let him suffer the way my own child suffered. I could not watch another baby leave this world." Jonathan's breath caught. He did not expect her honesty to cut so deeply. He stepped back slightly, fighting the tightness in his throat. "Why did you not tell me sooner that you lost a child?" Grace looked away, her chin trembling. "People ask too many questions, sir. I did not want to look weak." The room grew quiet again. Jonathan stared at her, really seeing her for the first time. Not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a broken woman carrying a hurt he never tried to understand. After a long pause, he said softly, "Grace, people are talking." Grace's legs felt weak. "Talking about what, sir?" He sighed. "Some of the staff saw you last night," they told others. "The neighbors heard something too. Rumors are spreading. I need time to think about how to handle this." Grace felt the air leave her lungs. The word rumors hit her like a stone. Her heart beat slowly, painfully. "Sir," she whispered, her hands shaking again. "Are you going to fire me?" Jonathan did not answer immediately. He turned toward the window, staring at the rain beginning to fall. "I do not know yet," he said quietly. "But this situation is bigger than both of us now." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. Outside, the rain tapped against the glass, each drop sounding like a warning that the storm between them was only beginning. Rain poured heavily over Chicago that night, hitting the mansion windows with soft taps that sounded like whispered warnings. Grace Parker sat alone in the dim staff dining room, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron, her throat tight with fear. The whispers inside the house had already begun. She could feel them in the glances staff members gave her. She heard them in the hushed voices that stopped whenever she entered a room. She felt them like needles in her skin. She had not seen Jonathan since their meeting that morning. Hours passed, yet no decision came. Every second made her chest ache a little more. She tried to sweep the kitchen floor, but her hands kept shaking. She tried to dust the shelves, but her eyes kept filling with tears. Nothing could quiet the fear that she was about to lose the one place she had left in this world. Upstairs, Jonathan stood in his office, leaning over the desk with both hands pressed firmly into the wood. His tie was loose again, his hair slightly messy from running, his fingers through it too many times. He stared at Samuel's baby monitor on the desk. The tiny glow on the screen showed his son sleeping peacefully, something he had not done properly in days. He whispered, "She saved you," as if the child could hear him. But then he remembered the phone call from his neighbor earlier that afternoon. Her voice had been sharp, almost proud of the gossip she carried. "Jonathan, people are talking about your house again. I heard something strange about one of your maids. You know how the world is. You cannot allow things like that. It looks bad for you, for your name." He had hung up before she finished, but her words stayed like a stone on his chest. He paced slowly, his shoes making soft sounds against the polished floor. He hated gossip. He hated the pressure of society. But he also knew that the same society judged him for everything he did. One wrong move could harm his businesses, his reputation, his son's future. Yet, when he remembered Grace's trembling voice, the fear in her eyes, and her honesty when she said she only wanted to save Samuel, something inside him cracked again. He whispered to himself, "Why did I not see her pain before now?" The hours dragged on. Downstairs, Grace finally gathered enough courage to go check on Samuel. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and walked slowly up the staircase, her steps careful, almost silent. When she reached the nursery door, she paused. Her hand shook as she lifted it to knock, but before she could touch the door, it opened from inside. Jonathan stood there. The sudden shock made her step back slightly. His expression was unreadable, his eyes tired and darker than usual. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "Come in." Grace lowered her head and stepped into the room. The soft night light glowed against the walls. Samuel slept peacefully in the crib, his little chest rising softly. Grace's eyes softened at the sight, but she did not step closer. She stood near the door, unsure if she was even allowed to be there. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, then moved closer to the crib. His voice came out low. He slept most of the afternoon. Grace nodded. "I am glad, sir." Jonathan sat down in the armchair, rubbing his forehead. "The doctor said something else today." Grace waited, her breath held inside her chest. "She said Samuel is attached to you," Jonathan continued. "She said the way he responded to you last night shows he trusts you. She said babies know who brings them comfort." Grace felt her eyes warm again, but she blinked quickly to keep the tears from falling. "He is a sweet child, sir. Anyone would love him." Jonathan shook his head slowly. "Not anyone. Not the nanny I hired. She left him alone while she went out shopping." Grace looked down at her shoes. "I am sorry, sir." "You keep saying that," Jonathan said softly. "Yet you are the only one in this house who did not fail him." Grace felt her knees weaken. She bit her lip to stop herself from crying. Jonathan stood up, walking toward her. "Grace, I know last night was complicated. I know people are talking. But I need to understand everything clearly." Grace nodded slowly. "Ask anything, sir." He stepped closer, his voice calm. "When you held him last night, what did you feel?" Grace pressed her trembling hands together. "I felt fear, sir. Fear that he was slipping away. Fear that I was about to watch another tiny life grow quiet in my arms. I felt something inside me break all over again." Jonathan's chest tightened at her words. Grace continued, "I know people do not understand what I did. I know it looks wrong. But in that moment, I cared more about his breath than what the world would say about me." Silence filled the room again. Her honesty hung in the air like a heavy truth that had no easy answer. Jonathan looked toward the crib, then back at Grace. "The staff is talking. The neighbors are gossiping. But despite all that, one thing I keep coming back to is this. You saved my son. I cannot change that. I cannot ignore it. Grace's breath trembled. But will you fire me, sir? Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, his expression torn, his voice calm but serious. I have not decided yet, but this situation is bigger than a simple choice. Everything in my world is watched, judged, twisted. I need time to think. Grace felt like her heart dropped to her feet. She nodded slowly, even though her chest felt like it was breaking apart. I understand, sir, she whispered. Jonathan stepped closer. Grace! She raised her eyes gently. I do not want to hurt you, he said. I just need to do what is right for my son. Grace nodded again, her voice too soft to rise. I would never harm him. Jonathan's voice softened. I know. A quiet pause filled the room. You may go rest, Jonathan said slowly. Grace bowed her head and turned to leave. When she stepped out of the room, her legs shook with every step she took down the hallway. She felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. She did not know if tomorrow would bring mercy or punishment. But deep inside her heart, she knew one thing for sure. The storm had just begun. The morning sun rose weakly over Chicago, pushing thin light through the hospital windows. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and quiet sadness. Inside a small room on the third floor, baby Samuel lay in a white crib with tubes connected to his tiny arms. His cheeks were pale, his breath soft and slow. Nurses moved around him gently, checking his temperature, adjusting the small blanket covering his chest. Jonathan Edwards stood beside the crib with his hands resting on the metal rail. His eyes were swollen from crying, something he had not done in years. The weight of the past days hung on his shoulders like heavy stones. He had everything the world admired: money, power, influence. Yet none of it could comfort the child in front of him. None of it could erase the mistake he made when he pushed Grace away. He whispered, I am sorry, my boy. But Samuel did not stir. A nurse approached Jonathan softly. He is not responding well, sir. He keeps refusing the milk. We are worried. Jonathan closed his eyes in pain. What does he need? The nurse hesitated. He needs the one person he trusted. He needs the woman who made him feel safe. Jonathan knew exactly who she meant. He knew it before anyone said it. He rubbed his forehead and whispered, I sent her away. The nurse nodded sadly. Then you need to bring her back. Jonathan wasted no time. He grabbed his coat and rushed out of the hospital. His heart beat in a slow, painful rhythm as he drove across the city. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving the roads wet and the sky gray. He searched everywhere he could think of, but hours passed and there was no sign of Grace. He called people. He asked neighbors. He even returned to the mansion hoping she might have come back, but she had not. Just as he was about to lose hope, his phone rang. A weak, elderly voice spoke on the other end. Are you the man looking for Grace Parker? Jonathan nearly dropped the phone. Yes. Please tell me where she is. I found her near Riverbend Bridge. She is sick. She needs help. Jonathan did not wait for more information. He drove fast, his hands tight on the wheel, his chest full of fear. When he reached the bridge, he jumped out of the car and ran into the dark space beneath it. A few homeless people sat under makeshift blankets. One pointed toward the corner. Jonathan turned and saw her. Grace Parker lay curled on the cold concrete ground with her back against the wall. Her clothes were wet, her hair tangled, her skin pale. She looked so small and fragile that his heart broke the moment he saw her. She blinked slowly, her eyes cloudy with exhaustion. Grace, Jonathan whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. She looked up weakly. Why are you here? Her voice was thin, almost fading. The sight of her suffering cut Jonathan deeper than any rumor or judgment ever could. "I came for you," he said softly. "You need help, and my son needs you." Grace lowered her eyes. "I cannot help everyone, sir." Jonathan shook his head. "You do not understand. Samuel is dying. He refuses food. He cries until he cannot breathe. The doctor said only you can reach him." A tear slipped down Grace's cheek. "You told me to leave. You did not let me say goodbye." Jonathan looked broken. "I was wrong. I let fear guide me instead of truth. Please, Grace, do not punish him for my mistake." Grace closed her eyes. The sound of Samuel crying in her memory echoed inside her mind. Her heart felt torn, yet one thought kept rising. "I will go," she whispered softly, "but only for the baby." Jonathan nodded quickly, helping her to her feet. She stumbled, and he caught her gently, holding her as if she were something precious he almost lost forever. Together, they walked to the car, the cold air brushing their faces. For the first time, Jonathan held no pride, no judgment, only fear and hope. The drive to the hospital was silent. Grace sat with her hands on her lap, her eyes fixed on the window. Jonathan kept glancing at her, afraid she might collapse, afraid he had found her too late. When they reached the hospital, nurses rushed to assist. The moment Grace stepped inside the room where Samuel lay, the atmosphere changed. She walked slowly to the crib, her hands shaking, her breath uneven. She reached out and touched Samuel's tiny hand. His eyes fluttered open slightly, then closed again. Grace whispered, "It is me, little one. I am here now." The baby stirred, just a little. Grace lifted him carefully. She held him close to her chest as tears slipped down her cheeks. She rocked him gently, her voice soft like a warm breeze. She hummed a small lullaby, the same one she used to sing to her own child. Slowly, Samuel's breathing began to change. The tension in his small body relaxed, his crying softened. The lead doctor watched from the doorway, amazed. "This is remarkable," she whispered. "He remembers her." Jonathan stood behind Grace, his hands shaking as he watched life return to his son's face. For the first time in days, Samuel opened his eyes fully and let out a tiny sound, a tired but peaceful sound. Grace held him tightly, whispering comfort into his ear. Hours passed. Grace did not move from Samuel's side. She fed him slowly, she sang to him, she rubbed his back, she wiped his tears. Jonathan sat in the corner watching them, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt, relief, and something deeper he could not hide anymore. When Samuel finally fell into a deep, steady sleep, Grace looked up at Jonathan. "He will survive," she said softly. Jonathan's eyes filled. "Because of you!" Grace shook her head. "Because he is strong." Jonathan walked closer. "Grace, I owe you more than words can explain. I am not asking you to forgive me today, but please, do not leave again. Not as a maid, but as someone we need in our lives." Grace looked at him quietly, her voice soft. "I did not come back for you, sir. I came for the child." Jonathan nodded. "I know, but I am asking you to stay for yourself too." Grace looked down at Samuel, then back at Jonathan. Her eyes were tired, yet hopeful. "I will think about it," she whispered. Jonathan breathed out slowly, as if he had been holding his breath for too long. "That is enough," he said softly. As the night fell, Samuel slept peacefully. Grace rested beside him, and Jonathan stood near the window watching the lights of Chicago flicker far below. Something had changed in that room, something soft, something real. For the first time in a long time, the mansion, the father, and the broken nanny all felt a small light of hope returning. Dear viewers, this story shows that love can appear in places we never expect, and sometimes the person we think is the weakest carries the strongest heart. Grace Parker walked into that mansion as a maid, grieving and alone. Yet her kindness saved a life. Jonathan Edward had wealth, power, and a big name in Chicago, but it was the gentle touch of a humble nanny that brought warmth back into his home and hope back into his heart. This story teaches us that family is not only created by blood, but by compassion, by sacrifice, and by the courage to see the truth behind someone's pain. Grace lost everything, yet she still chose love. Jonathan had everything, yet he learned that real strength lives in humility, understanding, and forgiveness. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what lesson you learned. Your words encourage us to keep sharing stories that heal, inspire, and remind people of what truly matters. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can save lives. And if you want more emotional stories like this, comment more stories below, and you will be the first to receive our next heart-touching release. Now tell us in the comments. 1. Which moment touched your heart the most? 2. Do you believe forgiveness can create a new beginning? 3. If you were in Grace's place, would you have done the same thing for baby Samuel? Your answers will help us understand what love means to you.